The moment Emery Smith stepped through the door of that containment corridor, he felt it, not saw it, felt it, a pressure in the chest, a shift in the air itself. Something behind the next sealed panel was alive, aware, and nothing like what he had encountered before, and he had encountered plenty. Smith is not a name that floats casually through UFO circles. His background, which he has discussed in extensive interviews, includes claims of working as a surgical assistant in classified programs at multiple military facilities, where he says he participated in the examination and study of non-human biological specimens. Dozens of them, by his account. Different sizes, different anatomies, different apparent origins. He describes this work with the kind of clinical, methodical precision that comes from someone who processed what he witnessed by leaning into the science of it, because the alternative was to simply lose his mind. And through all of that, the Greys were, in some strange way, almost familiar. If you've spent any time in this space, any time at all researching contact cases, abduction testimony, military whistleblower accounts, the Greys are the baseline, the reference point, the face that appears when someone says the word alien and means it. Smith's descriptions of them align closely with decades of accumulated testimony from other sources. Small in stature, large cranium, eyes like polished obsidian that seem to take in everything while giving nothing back, skin that reads as gray, sometimes with a bluish undertone depending on the lighting, and a presence that Smith describes as almost mechanically neutral, as if emotion, in the human sense, was simply not part of their operating system. He describes interacting with gray specimens in what he calls a kind of clinical detachment on both sides. There was communication, but Smith characterizes it as transactional. Information moving between 2 points. Imagery. Concepts delivered directly into his awareness without the warmth or the friction of language. He knew what they wanted him to understand. They seemed to register what he was thinking, but there was no relationship in it, no texture. It was, by his account, like interfacing with a system, extraordinarily advanced, genuinely alien in every sense of the word, but operating on a frequency that felt contained, purposeful, almost scripted. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because when Smith describes his encounters with what he identifies as reptilian beings, everything about that dynamic shifts, and not in the direction you might expect from the way reptilians are typically portrayed in this genre. Popular culture tends to frame them as predatory, domineering, malevolent by default. Smith's testimony is more complicated than that, and honestly more unsettling in its complexity. Physically, the contrast was immediate and unmistakable. Where the Greys were slight, compact, almost fragile in appearance despite what Smith describes as their clear intellectual and technological sophistication, the reptilian beings he encountered were imposing in a way that registered in the body before the mind caught up. Taller, broader through the shoulders and chest, scaled integument rather than smooth skin, with a coloration Smith describes as ranging from deep olive green to something closer to brown or amber depending on the individual. The facial structure was more pronounced, more angular, with eyes that were not the flat black orbs of the Greys, but rather something with visible structure, with depth, with what Smith says felt uncomfortably close to actual expression. That word, expression, is important, because Smith is careful in how he uses it. He's not claiming the reptilians were emotional in a human way, but he describes a quality of engagement that the Greys simply did not have. When a Grey was in the room, you were aware of its intelligence the way you might be aware of a very sophisticated piece of equipment running calculations. When a reptilian was in the room, according to Smith's account, you were aware that something was watching you back, actively, deliberately, with what registered as intent. The communication difference was significant. Where the Greys transmitted in what Smith characterizes as compressed packets, almost like data transfer, clean and directional, the reptilian communication was something he describes as more layered, more atmospheric, less like receiving information, and more like being inside a conversation that existed on multiple levels simultaneously. He describes a kind of emotional undertow to it, a sense of will behind the transmission, as if the Greys communicated to convey, and the reptilians communicated to influence. Whether that influence was benign or otherwise is something Smith is careful not to declare absolutely, and that carefulness itself tells you something. This is a man who, by his own testimony, has sat in rooms with beings most people will never encounter, who has had to develop a working framework for understanding things that have no precedent in ordinary human experience. And when asked directly about the nature of the reptilian beings he encountered, their agenda, their relationship to humanity, their intentions, he doesn't reach for the easy answer. He says it's complicated. He says there appear to be different factions, different orientations, different purposes. Just as you wouldn't characterize all of humanity by its worst actors, he suggests extending that same complexity to what he witnessed. Now, step back for a moment and sit with what that actually means. If Smith's testimony carries even partial truth, if the framework he's describing reflects something real, then we are not dealing with a single extraterrestrial phenomenon. We are not dealing with one species, one agenda, one type of contact. We are looking at something that more closely resembles an ecosystem. Multiple intelligent species, different physiologies, different communication modalities, different relationships to humanity, to each other, to whatever programs were allegedly running inside those classified facilities. The question stops being, are we alone, and becomes something far more complex. Who exactly is out there? What do they want? And how long has this been going on without the rest of us being told? The distinction Smith draws between the Greys and the Reptilians isn't just zoological curiosity, it's a structural argument. If these are two separate species with different biological origins, different behavioral patterns, different apparent agendas, then the phenomenon itself is orders of magnitude more sophisticated than any single species contact narrative allows for. It means the programs allegedly studying these beings weren't studying one thing. They were managing relationships, multiple relationships, with multiple intelligences that may or may not have been cooperative with each other. That's a different world than the one we were told we were living in. Smith has been consistent across years of interviews and presentations in maintaining these distinctions. He doesn't conflate the species. He doesn't blur the details for dramatic effect. If anything, his accounts have the texture of someone working hard to be precise about things that resist easy description, to find the right words for experiences that human language wasn't built to carry. The Greys were this. The Reptilians were something else. Different enough that encountering one after the other required, by his account, a complete reset of whatever internal framework he'd built to process the first. There are people who will hear this testimony and dismiss it immediately. That's a reasonable impulse when you're hearing claims this far outside ordinary experience. But dismissal is also a choice to stop asking questions, and the questions here feel important. Multiple credible researchers across multiple decades have noted that witness testimony from entirely unconnected sources often converges on the same specific physical and behavior, details, not vague impressions, specific details. That convergence doesn't prove anything on its own, but it does suggest the conversation deserves more than ridicule. Emery Smith's account of the difference between the Greys and the Reptilians adds a layer to that conversation that the mainstream narrative hasn't caught up with yet. Because we've been so focused on the question of whether contact is real that we've barely started asking what it would mean if the answer is yes, and if that answer comes packaged with more variables, more species, more complexity than any of our existing frameworks were designed to hold. Whatever you believe about the origins of these accounts, whether you sit firmly in the skeptic's chair or whether you've followed this story long enough to feel the weight of the accumulated evidence, the picture Smith describes is one that refuses to be simple. Two species, radically different, both allegedly encountered by the same man in the same classified corridors within programs that the rest of the world was never supposed to know existed. That's the part that stays with you. Not the strangeness of the beings themselves, but the implication that someone, somewhere, has known about this complexity for a very long time, and decided the rest of us weren't ready to hear it. Maybe they were right. Or maybe the longer we wait, the more we miss. The more we miss, the less prepared we are for whatever comes next. And something tells me, whatever comes next, it won't look like what any of us were expecting.